I'm Roger too. Good afternoon. I'm the senior policy analyst for the Utah League of Cities and Towns, also known as the tax guy. And today we're going to be talking about sales tax and sales tax distribution. I want to welcome two guests that we have today from the Utah State Tax Commission, Scott Stevens and Jim Clayton. They are basically the people who handle getting our cities their money from sales tax. And there's a distribution formula that they're in charge of monitoring, and so we've had enough questions about the distribution formula that we thought we'd devote today's webcast to a discussion of sales tax and sales tax distribution. I think we're going to begin with, is Jim going to start?
Well, I'll give a little background.
Would you please? Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, so we're going to talk a little bit about sourcing. There's a number of issues with sourcing.
Explain what you mean by sourcing.
So sourcing is really just the method that a business, a retail business, or any vendor who is collecting sales tax pays the correct rate. So
if you go buy something in a store, they need to know what rate to apply.
Right. So if you go to your local Walmart, you're going to get charged 6.85%. But if you're in St. George or if you're in Logan, you're going to get charged a different rate because there are different taxes that have been imposed by local jurisdictions. And so sourcing is important so that you can charge the correct rate, and the components that make up the rate can be distributed. And the components are the local piece that a lot of people listening would be interested in, or mass transit, or short-term leasing, or those other types of taxes.
And the sourcing is important because, particularly now with internet sales, not talking about the ones collecting the tax internet sales, they actually need to know where your home is. Is that correct?
Right. And so a lot of times we're starting to get used to purchasing things off of places like Amazon. And so Amazon now is actually collecting tax for Utah. And how they do that is they source it based on delivery location. So delivery location is where you live. So if you sit at your computer and you order from Amazon, not one of the third-party providers, but Amazon.com, they will take your address and they will use what we call a ZIP+4 database, a process that we allow third-party vendors like Amazon.com to use to take the 5-digit county city code, which is how we assign each jurisdiction. So all the 200 and how many are there? 291?
291.
So there's 290.
All of those aren't cities. Those are counties.
Those are towns, cities, unincorporated counties, and special type districts that are assigned certain county city codes. So they all get a different rate structure. So, they don't charge just one rate. They charge the rate based on the local jurisdiction. So they would download the ZIP+4 database, and they would source it based on the address. So all you have to do is provide your address where they're going to deliver it, and Amazon will ship it to you, and it will be sourced to the delivery location, which is where you live.
Now, I know one of the questions we'll bring up later is we have a number of communities who share zip codes.
And yes, we will get into that.
And one of the things that's prompted this discussion is some of those communities are concerned that they're not getting their money. So with that in mind, I don't know how you want to proceed. Do you want to, Jim, do you want to start with your presentation?
In the first slide, just some trivia about ZIP+4. In the state of Utah, there are 347 different zip codes that we use. And as Scott mentioned earlier, 291 locations, different unique taxing jurisdictions for sales tax purposes. The ZIP+4 database actually contains 604,948 unique ZIP+4s. Of those, 379,316 pertain to actual street addresses. The others are post office boxes and general delivery.
So Jim, the point is if you use a ZIP+4, it actually gets down to basically the houses.
Yes, down to, well,
the block is
the block face.
Right.
A ZIP+4 is a block face. We'll get into that in another slide. As indicated on this slide, each ZIP+4 identifies either a block face or a high volume mail recipient or an apartment building or something else. Let's go to slide number 2. And on this slide is a screen print of how an individual could look up their own ZIP+4. You see an address there. It's a Salt Lake City address. It's a valid address. On the left side in the gray box below, the post office gives a standardized address, and in that standardized address is the zip plus 4 84116-2749, and this is identified as being in Salt Lake City. And on the right side, you can see the county city code 18-122, which is Salt Lake City's county city code.
And I was going to add how the zip plus 4 database is created. So a local jurisdiction, when it annexes a piece of property or a piece of land, they have to submit that to the Lieutenant Governor's office. And so our DTS and the technical services people work with the Lieutenant Governor's office to really keep track of the geographic boundaries of each jurisdiction. And we've talked to our technical folks, and they would, if they were here, they would tell you it's 99% accurate.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they have, latitude and longitude plugged into addresses, and there's a lot of detail to it. So it's pretty accurate as long as the vendors are properly utilizing the database, which sources it to the right county city code, thus the correct rate.
Mm-hmm. Okay, in slide number 3 is an aerial shot or a satellite photo of a neighborhood. The yellow line represents one block face, or a zip plus 4. And so in this one you see that there's one house essentially on the right side of the yellow line. If we could go to slide 4 just quickly, that's another block face. Again, only one house in this picture. Slide 5, a big long block face that includes several houses. And then slide 6 is just the other side of the street, which again, all of those are unique block faces and zip plus 4s.
And different zip plus 4.
Different zip plus 4 assigned to each one of those yellow lines. And then finally, slide number 7, the final zip plus 4 in this example. So each one represents a block face. You see that there's one north-south street that causes an intersection on the longer street at the bottom of the page.
That's on slide 8?
It's still on slide 7.
Still on slide 7.
So what I'm saying is the street creates an intersection.
Oh, okay.
Which creates a new block face for
But that shows you how narrow the zip plus 4 is.
Exactly.
You could have a business theoretically that could be on the wrong side of that line.
Mm-hmm.
Right. You can have a local jurisdiction that goes through a business, and that business could be half in a county and half in a city.
Mm-hmm.
And so sourcing in that circumstance can actually be very interesting. So for instance, if that were a car dealership and the inventory were in the county and the office where you conduct the business is in the city, who do you source that to? Do you source it based on where the inventory is or where the order occurs?
Okay, question. What do you do?
Well, and the answer is the statute tells us what to do. And the statute says it's where the order occurs. And the areas in the statute, if any of you have interested in looking at the statute, 12, 211, 212, those areas talk about sourcing. But what the statute says is that's going to be sourced based on where the order takes place. So the city, in my example, would be sourced with that, even though the inventory came out of the county.
So where the office is gets to be called the location.
Right.
Okay.
That's how it's sourced. And there are examples of those types of things happening. Now, the other types of things that people have a tendency to think of is, I always think of Ogden, because up in Ogden, along Riverdale Road, you go through Ogden, South Ogden, Riverdale, and is it North Ogden? It goes through like 3 or 4 jurisdictions up there, and there's one zip code for that. So if you're using zip code, you would have no idea how to really source that properly. But if you use zip plus 4 and you plug in the address, it'll tell you Riverdale, South Ogden, Ogden. It will give you the correct information to source it properly and charge you the correct sales tax rate with the correct components that make up the rate.
So if we get the zip plus 4 correct, everybody should be getting the correct rate and the correct allocation.
Yes.
Right. Now, some of the issues related to that is, if you are a non-nexus vendor, and that means you don't have any warehouse or any brick and mortar in the state of Utah. You're strictly out of the state of Utah and you're selling stuff into the state of Utah. That sourcing is based on delivery location, and they have to properly source it, be utilizing the tools that we provide, which would be the ZIP+4 database. So that we do know that there are instances where they don't get it right all the time, but they certainly have the tools to do it right. And we do know that if they do get it wrong, we become aware of a city or town or somebody who says, hey, look, I got charged the wrong rate. You can notify Jim or myself, and we would work with our auditing division, and we would probably be in the mode of contacting them and letting them know, hey, this is the process to source it correctly so that it's paid correctly to the right jurisdiction based on the rules and statutes.
Roger indicated that there was a concern that several cities share the same zip code, and that is true. For instance, I live in Riverton. My zip code is 84065. However, all of Bluffdale also shares that same zip code, 84065. So there is a concern that if I live in Bluffdale, all of my sales tax revenues are going to come, online sales, are going to come to Riverton rather than to Bluffdale. And by using the ZIP+4, they can identify that even though it says 84065, this particular ZIP+4 does belong to Bluffdale rather than Riverton or Harriman or any other.
Question, and I don't want to jump to things you may be covering anyway, but I think one of the questions is the responsibility for getting the correct ZIP+4, does that reside with the vendor?
It does.
So, in other words, local citizens are not necessarily responsible, because honestly, I don't remember what my ZIP+4 is.
No, very few people would remember their own ZIP+4, and we do provide enough tools to the online vendors that they can assign the correct county city code and the correct ZIP+4 to any street location that they're shipping to.
So if you go on to Amazon and you put in your address so that they know where to deliver it to, almost everybody knows their zip code.
Mm-hmm.
And when you put your address and zip code in, the tools that we provide to the vendors convert that address into a ZIP+4, which gives you the correct rate and the correct jurisdiction.
So the tools are out there to the vendor to get it correct.
Right. Right. So the vendors will download on a quarterly basis what's called a boundary file. And if you go to the Tax Commission website, you can find that file. You could even look at it and download it yourself. It's public record. You could plug in an address to in our TAP tool and validate that it's going to bring back the correct jurisdiction. So if you're interested, type in your own address where you live. It'll calculate the ZIP+4, and you'll be able to see it sources it.
I understand we got a question.
Yes, we do. Alan Anderson, who's a council member in West Jordan, has this question. Do cities receive sales tax from Amazon sales when the state negotiated the way to collect the sales tax, or does that money just go to the state?
It does go to the individual location based on the ZIP+4 and the correct county city code. I might say that at this point that Amazon does collect and it appears to be using the ZIP+4 database correctly and is sourcing to almost all jurisdictions in the state.
Yeah, now the caveat to that, so we do charge the full state and local rate. And when I say local rate, that would be the 1%, the 0.25% mass transit, and all the other components that make up the local rate. So the full rate is charged. However, when you buy something from Amazon, you don't always buy it from Amazon. Sometimes there are other third-party vendors that are part of the Amazon system. And a lot of those do not actually collect the sales tax. So if you're Amazon.com, we are collecting it. But if you're one of the third-party vendors selling through Amazon, some of those, or a lot of those, are not actually paying sales tax.
Hopefully that issue is going to get resolved for the court case soon.
Right.
But just to emphasize, in a prior lifetime, I was on the Utah State Tax Commission. I can appreciate that sometimes when we talk about the collection of sales tax, the presumption is it's just the state. For these guys, everything else, sales tax is the amalgamation of every sales tax rate that is there.
Yes.
Correct.
Any other questions right now?
Nope, that's it so far.
Okay. what should cities, is there anything that cities can do to ensure that vendors are using the ZIP plus 4? I mean, I realize the responsibility of the vendors is to you guys as in terms of the information that's filed.
You know, there seems to be maybe two ways. You know, sometimes we become aware because some city council member or some citizen is paying attention and they live in Sandy and they say, gee, I got charged the Alta rate, you know, a higher tax rate or something like that. And so they know what their tax rate is and somehow they got charged the wrong rate. And when we become aware of that, we can look at that vendor and we can look at what happened. Why did that happen? What tools did they use? And we can call them and help them understand this is how you do it properly. The other way is we do send a detailed listing to all the cities and towns each month for the local portion of the sales tax. And you can look for, does it show up separately as Amazon as an aggregate?
Yes.
So-
Is that right? So Amazon shows on
So-
the
Amazon will show up on the distribution report. It'll show one line per city. So
actually all the money is sourced to the warehouse location.
correct.
Right, the Creasy's catering type who go around and honk the horn and you come out and get a sandwich. Many, many years ago, that used to be sourced based on, they used to have to kind of prorate and keep track of where the sales took place. Now it's just sourced to, well, the inventory all came out of Salt Lake City, and if they drive around throughout the whole entire county, all the sales that occur go directly to Salt Lake City.
But it's worth reminding all our cities that because we divide that money at 50-50, even though that gets sourced to the warehouse in Salt Lake, you're all getting a
Right.
portion of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, half of all local option sales tax is distributed throughout based on population. So every sale that occurs anywhere in the state, every jurisdiction is getting half of it based on population.
Okay, any other questions? I jumped on your presentation.
Just one point as we look at the ZIP plus 4 and what happens if a ZIP plus 4 straddles two cities, for instance. And in slide number
I assume
8,
we do have that happen.
we do have that happen. There are two general rules that apply to a situation like that. In the first example, you see jurisdiction 1, jurisdiction 2, they both have exactly the same rate. But jurisdiction 2 only has 2 locations in that ZIP plus 4, and jurisdiction 1 has a whole bunch more. In this case, it'll be sourced to the city that has the most locations in that ZIP plus 4. However, in the next slide, slide number 9, there's a slight difference. Jurisdiction 2 has a lower rate than jurisdiction 1. In this case, jurisdiction 2 will get all of the sourcing from that ZIP plus 4, all 10 houses on that block,
Because it's the lowest rate.
because it is the lowest rate.
So let me make sure here, if you happen to have the dynamic, I assume it's relatively rare, but it does happen, where you're splitting the ZIP plus 4 between jurisdictions, whoever has the lowest rate or the most places.
Right.
Exactly.
Was-
So we have one more question that came in,
Sure.
that I'll ask before we wrap up. It's from Brian Braithwaite, who's a council member in Highland. What incentive is there for the company to implement the ZIP plus 4? We share our zip code with American Fork. If they don't use ZIP plus 4, and since American Fork is the zip, do they get all the tax revenue? If it only shows the zip code, will it be identified in a different bucket of tax money that we share with American Fork?
There is no incentive for them to use the ZIP plus 4. They are required to use the ZIP plus 4. They really don't have a choice.
So if they aren't doing it, they're not complying.
They're not complying, essentially.
Yeah, the way to look at that is, you know, we do desire to get the money sourced properly so the local jurisdictions get their money. We do have audit resources. You know, I'm sure when some of these businesses begin to have nexus in the state of Utah, at some point they will be audited and they will look at the tax amounts collected. And if they collected it at the wrong rates because they sourced it to a lower rate and they were really in a higher rate jurisdiction and it should have been sourced somewhere else, they will be audited. Most of the audits that do occur, they're usually about 3-year audits and they go back and assess.
But I want to emphasize one thing here. This is not an optional exercise by a retailer. They're required to have that. So if you enter an address in Highland, since that's where the Councilman Braithwaite raised the question from, that vendor should be sourcing it to the right number. Right.
Right.
If they're not, what's the option?
Well, if they're not, we need to become aware that they're not doing that. And then basically, we would need to inform the vendor how to do it properly. And then basically in the statute, you could probably amend for about 90 days is what the statute allows for to change it. So you want to try to get it correct right up front.
Before we're close to wrapping up here, I assume there's an ongoing education effort that the tax commission has with vendors about how they're supposed to do this.
Yes.
And with vendors coming and going, it's an ongoing exercise.
There is an annual training session that is held at the tax commission where they can come in and get training. There's also various publications on the tax commission website, and basically contact with our taxpayer services and other areas that work on those areas.
I want to thank you for spending some time to be here. As my good friend Dave Church says, money puts the fun in governing. So I know you're always concerned about getting the correct money. I appreciate the tax commission's effort. I know it's not perfect, but I think the system is in place to make it about as good as realistically can be in this regard. We're not the only jurisdiction. I think it's almost mandatory anywhere now that you're using a ZIP +4 in terms of vendor sales tax, and there's 45 states that have that.
Right.
So I want to thank immensely Scott Stevens and Jim Clayton for spending some time with us today. If there's any questions or further follow-up, please contact me, and we'll be glad to direct our questions to Jim and Scott. They've been terrific to work with us at the League on sales tax matters. So thank you very much.